This is Just Dubs with John Dickinson.
We want to keep this show as interactive as possible. It's instant reaction. It's hearing from the fans. It's going inside the locker room.
On KNBR 104.5 and 6.8. Streaming live at twitch.tv/thesportsleader.
He walked Jalen Johnson to the rim. Straight through his chest. Cave it in. 8 for 8. Look at it. Kuminga. I'm going to just go out on the limb and say 9 for 9. He has risen to the occasion. Galena was a rough night all the way around. It was a basketball game. It does not matter in terms of the real world versus the sports world, but for the Warriors, they will take the win, and we'll have a chance to talk to Steph Curry. And Steve Kerr, I don't know how he kept it together pregame. It was an amazing tribute and ceremony.
Barnes for three. Why not? Harrison Barnes just picking apart his old team. He's got 35 now. Curry's got it. Clock ticks to 3, to 2. He lost it into the hands of Fox. And that's it. Sacramento wins it. 134-133 in a wild finish. And the Kings lock them down defensively the last two possessions.
Yes, Warriors basketball is back, and so is Just Dubs with John Dickinson here on KNBR, the sports leader. We welcome you in. Good Saturday morning to you. A lot going on with the Golden State Warriors as they made their return to the hardwood on Wednesday night at Chase Center following the tragic passing of assistant coach Dejan Milojevic, and just a wonderful ceremony at Chase Center prior to the game against the Hawks, where the Warriors were able to get a win, but just terrific stuff under just unfathomable circumstances with the tribute video and the Serbian anthem and the Milojevic jerseys placed on his spot on the bench. Steve Kerr's comments as poignant as ever. And then a basketball game to be played that the Warriors did win against the Hawks, unable though to back it up with another one against Sacramento, as we had the highlights there coming in from TNT and also NBC Sports Bay Area. Appreciate the calls there. And so a 1-1 return to the hardwood for the Warriors after the layoff, and they're back in action tonight at Chase against the Los Angeles Lakers as rivalry week continues. I didn't even know it was rivalry week, and I know players on both sides of the Warriors and Kings kind of sick of being asked that question as they faced off against each other on Thursday night. But 808 KNBR is the number as we dive back into basketball here on the Sports Leader and dive back into this show, which comes your way each and every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. until noon, talking all things Golden State Warriors basketball and NBA. And so really looking forward to moving forward here now with under 2 weeks to go until the trade deadline, under 3 weeks now to go until the All-Star break, and the Warriors finding themselves at the midpoint of the season and now one game beyond the midpoint of the season following the Sacramento game with the 19-23 record. 4 games under 500, make no mistake about it. This Warriors team is 2 games out right now as we sit here from even being 10th in the Western Conference and even being a play-in tournament team. They've got Houston between them and Utah. The Lakers are currently 9th, but the Warriors 2 full games back of both 9th and 10th, which is the Lakers currently, again, as I mentioned, along with Utah. Both those teams are 500, and the Warriors 4 under, which means 2 back. And a critical homestand continues from a basketball standpoint for the Warriors with the Lakers tonight at Chase and the Philadelphia 76ers coming in on Tuesday before this team's going to head out on a big-time long road trip. Greg Silver is here, fine producer and co-host of this program. Greg, good to have you alongside once again. And, just a lot to get into for the Warriors as we kind of find our footing and the Warriors continue to find their footing amid a season that just has not gone any way, shape, or form the way that they would have expected. Good morning to you, buddy.
Good morning to you, JD, and I want to also compliment your camera setup. The image is looking fantastic in the background. No bare bones wall. Nobody's going to roast you today. And you're right, we do have a lot to get into because we sort of said this about 10 minutes before the show. Due to last week and mostly making it a 49ers divisional pregame show, we haven't even really gotten that much into Draymond Green's return. So with this team, 2 weeks is an eternity. There's a lot to talk about. Of course, we've talked a lot about Decky and the tribute that the Warriors did for him on Wednesday. But even just within the shell of basketball and much less important matters, there is still so much to unpack. So I'm excited that we have this 2-hour block to get it done.
808 KNBR is the number. Again, 808 KNBR, the Golden State Lumber and Building Materials text line. You can shoot us a text there. You can give us a call there as well. We do have the YouTube and Twitch streams up and running, and also should let everybody know that we will have Dubs OT for you tonight following the Warriors and the Lakers immediately at the Final Horn. And it's been nice on Thursday to get out and do that program from Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City. Going to be out there at Harmonic again tonight. So if you're going to the ball game, stop by and say hi after the ball game, as we'll be broadcasting live from Harmonic in Thrive City, talking some Dubs and some Lakers right after the Final Horn. So, yeah, a lot to get into. And Draymond Green's return is part of this, as it's now been 3 games when you go back to the MLK holiday game in Memphis before the passing of Coach Decky and the layoff that led the Warriors to return on Wednesday, beat the Hawks, and then lose another heartbreaker to Sacramento. A couple of heartbreakers now in the last 2 games that the Warriors have played against the Kings. They split the 4-game season series, but Jonathan Kuminga continues to emerge. Is it time for the Warriors to make some more lineup changes? I think the fan base, and really part of the problem for the Warriors as we get into sort of the big 3 headlines, because this team has a little under 2 weeks to figure it out, and it does feel, and it became clear to me, Greg, on Thursday night doing the Dubs OT show, it just became clear that this really feels, in a lot of ways, like a baseball team leading up to the trade deadline, where you're having to make that determination of buy or sell. And I don't feel like NBA trade deadline lead-ups really play out the same way, right, or as dramatically in terms of a hard, fine line course of action. But it does feel like the Warriors, given their circumstances with the payroll and their current standing in the Western Conference, on the outside looking in of even the play-in tournament, with Jonathan Kuminga's emergence and Draymond Green's return, they have to figure out whether some of the veterans on this roster are worth keeping beyond the trade deadline and at the financial cost and luxury tax ramifications and all those things that come into play. And they also have to figure, maybe it's not a soft rebuild, although, again, I don't know there is a standard definition for that, but maybe it is a Steph, Clay, and Draymond are going to be here, and Jonathan Kuminga, with as well as he's played really over the last month and a half, is going to be here, and a couple of the other younger players are going to be here. But maybe it does turn into, hey, the big 3 plus the most recent draft picks are the guys that are going to be around, and maybe you don't take your foot off the gas in terms of stating publicly that you're not concerned about making the playoffs or even making the play-in tournament, but it could become a scenario where you almost take that or leave it. You get your financial house in order, and anybody that sort of isn't Steph, Clay, or Draymond, or Kuminga, Moody, Podziemski, Trace Jackson Davis, that becomes the group of players that you potentially look to move. Because I think a couple of weeks ago when we were doing this show in earnest, before we basically paused for the week with everything that was going on for the Warriors, it seemed like, all right, this team needs to make a move. Like, this team needs to make a move to get back into the race. the next 2 weeks tell the story, Greg, but I kind of feel like now it's trending down the path of you like the young players that you have more and more. Maybe the pieces don't completely and totally fit, but you almost have to, I don't want to say two timelines, but accept what this team is going to be and sort of go developmental mode around the big three and then figure out some of the bigger picture options and questions over the course of the summer.
Well, I like your baseball analogy approaching the trade deadline. Actually, it kind of reminds me a little bit of what the Toronto Raptors were last year's trade deadline, because people weren't sure if they were going to be buyers or sellers. Was OG Anunoby going to be with the team? Was Pascal Siakam going to be with the team? What about Gary Trent? Then they ended up keeping all those guys and trading for Jakob Poeltl, only to then go into rebuild mode in the middle of this season. So, yeah, listen, I think that you're spot on with the two rookies they are going to keep for the financial flexibility, because why would you not do that for a team that has been pushing the luxury tax for years now? I think both Brandon Podziemski and Trayce Jackson-Davis look like high-value picks, or if you want to use the term steal, and relative to their draft selection. I think Brandon Podziemski has performed above the 19th overall pick, and Trayce Jackson-Davis has looked more valuable than a 57th overall pick, considering players that are picked that late in the draft often don't make NBA rosters, or they spend a couple years in the G League. And I think even though we haven't seen a lot of Trayce Jackson-Davis in the last week, he's someone that brings certain things to this Warriors roster that they don't necessarily have. They were last in the league in shot blocking, I think, before he started getting run, and then they had 4 blocks in a game at one point. I think he might have had 3 of them. So I don't know what's necessarily going to happen. I think that even if you trade somebody like Kevon Looney, but you still have the big three intact and build around them, I'm somebody who's going to be inclined to call that you're beginning the soft rebuild, because you're getting rid of an institution of the dynasty. And then there's the Klay Thompson question. He probably is going to be here for the remainder of the season. I see it unlikely that they dump him off, though not impossible. But then there was also the report that came out this week that said he still values himself as a high-money player and a wing, and I don't know if Mike Dunleavy Jr. is going to be willing to pay him that contract. So I know that might be a little bit ahead of ourselves talking offseason, and right now we're just focused on the trade deadline. But the larger point being, I think Steph Curry isn't going anywhere. I think Draymond Green is not going anywhere, and I think Jonathan Kuminga is not going to go anywhere. But other than that, this is very wildly up in the air.
Yeah, a lot of questions on the board here as we get things moving here. It's just Dubs, John Dickinson. We got Greg Silver here as well. KNBR, the sports leader. Jonathan Kuminga's continued emergence, including the career high 31 points that he had against Sacramento on Thursday. I do think that's putting him more in the untouchable category, just based on the fact that if he's going to play at the level that he's played at recently and have it contribute toward winning, because he's doing it with Draymond Green. And I think you've seen Kuminga play even more impactfully in the 3 games since Draymond Green has returned. And so I think that in and of itself, his ability to sort of show a level up from even the level that he had been, and doing it with Andrew Wiggins, who has been, we talked about the Wiggins-Kuminga combination and how bad it had been statistically over the course of this season. It's been better in recent games, and it's been better with Draymond Green out there on the floor with those two. And so it leads down the path as we kind of spray to all field here to begin the show. It leads to the question in the short term, does there need to be more lineup changes ahead? And the Warriors, Steve Kerr has just tried so hard all year to come up with some semblance of a consistent lineup, and almost no matter what he does, it tends to work for about 2 games, and then everybody starts screaming about the fact that it needs to change. I think it is time to get Draymond Green back in the starting lineup. I know the Warriors have been thrilled with Jonathan Kuminga's acceptance of the bench role and an ability to still come in and make a major impact on the game, even in that bench role. But it makes you wonder, should Draymond and Kuminga be going back into the starting lineup. I know there's probably a part of Steve Kerr that's thinking, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, with the way Kuminga's leveled up off the bench in the game since Draymond Green has returned, even though they've both been playing off the bench together in those 3 games, basically Draymond being the first sub in, and then a minute later Kuminga winds up being the next sub in. But do you go to Draymond now back with Kuminga at the 4 and Wiggins at the 3? Do you keep Kuminga off the bench? And if you do, then that leads, because you're facing Anthony Davis and you're facing a Lakers team that has some size, that means maybe you want to have Looney out there a little bit at the beginning, and then you're going back to the starting 5 that was so successful a year ago, but it had not been as successful in terms of offense and ball movement and those things with Looney and Draymond and Wiggins at the 3 with Klay Thompson and Stephen Curry. So no matter where Steve Kerr tries to go, it always feels like there's another move potentially needing to have to be made in the couple of games to beyond that. So short term, it's lineup changes. Midterm, I think here in the next 2 weeks, 12 days up until the trade deadline, it becomes, and I think this team has a say with the games that are coming up tonight and Tuesday, and then the road trip as they'll go to Memphis and Atlanta. I mean, those are a couple of winnable games coming up next weekend. Before the Warriors go to Brooklyn. Brooklyn's really struggling. They play Philadelphia and Indiana on the back end of that trip before coming home to take on Phoenix. And then they got a couple of games now against Utah on the road between now and the break. But they're going to have to make that decision by the end of this next road trip, before the end of the next road trip, where the trade deadline will coincide with the finale of that road trip against Indiana. So if this team continues to struggle, they take a couple more L's here on this homestand. They go on the road and maybe can't get on a roll where they win, let's say 2, 3, 4 in a row, then they may wind up in a position where basically the what needs to be done is done. The decision is made for them in a lot of ways if this team continues to separate in the wrong direction from the 500 mark. And then what does that mean in terms of I'm with you, Greg. I feel like Klay Thompson's gonna be around, but you mentioned the report from Anthony Slater. And, Klay Thompson is not a star-level, high-end, close to the max contract player anymore. And if he refuses to admit that he is, then that creates a problem to where I think the Warriors and Klay are going to have an honest conversation about where things are at the deadline and where things may be in the offseason. I still think you could make the case that Klay Thompson has earned the right, especially if this team is making it or not making it. You know what I mean? Like kind of indifferent toward whether they make the play-in tournament or not. And I don't think they are at that point yet, but I think 12 days from now, they may be at the point where they're indifferent about whether they make a run to get into the play-in tournament or not. If they get to that point, I still think you could make the case that Klay Thompson being owed the opportunity to basically finish his Warriors portion of his career with Draymond and Steph and with the fanfare that goes with celebrating everything that he brought to the table. Again, not saying that he's gone for sure, Greg, but if there is a possibility that if they can't, and I think that's part of the reason why a deal is not done, is that they just flat out disagree on value and disagree on money and disagree on the player that Klay believes he is versus what the organization and the league potentially believes he is. So that is another dynamic that has to get factored in here in the next 2 weeks as to whether the Warriors kick the can down the road and push that into the off season. And this is going to be this is going to be a pivot point off season for the Warriors based on everything that happens here over the next 2.5 months.
Yeah, well, winning cures a lot, right? And the Warriors have done a whole lot of winning over the last decade, but right now they have not earned the luxury to avoid having really hard conversations. And that includes, what do we do about Klay Thompson? That includes, what do we do about Steve Kerr's contract in the offseason? That includes, hey, Steph, we want you to be a Warrior for life, but how can we make this functional where you can stay a Warrior for life and we can build a team around you that can be competitive on the very back end of your career? I also have a couple thoughts on the lineups with Kuminga and Draymond, and I think this is a really good chance to open up the phone lines and the Golden State Lumber and Building Materials text line, hear from some of the people out there, because my opinion on it is time for Draymond to get back into the starting lineup, because the Warriors have had far too many first quarters where they give up 40-plus points and they immediately find themselves in a hole. I don't think offense and finding sources of offense has actually been that much of an issue, at least in terms of what it was blown up to be with the Steph Curry has no help label. Defensively, there's been a lot of problems, and I know that the Kings shot the lights out and Draymond did play that game, but by and large, they are a much better defensive team with Draymond Green out there. So
they let him get going, Greg. I mean, that was the thing. And look, the Kings are an excellent offensive team, but there was no force at the beginning of the game. They were just kind of letting the Kings do what the Kings do, and they got hot from three, and all of a sudden Fox has got a quiet 29-30. Sabonis, I think, had his best game against the Warriors maybe ever since coming to Sacramento. Just most impactful, right? Efficient, scoring on his terms. And then they let Herter and Harrison Barnes get going. And when the Kings are getting balance from their five that they start, and they get it going early in a game, you can't quite get the stops that you need to get later on in the game. And so I'm with you as far as the start goes. You give up 40 in the first quarter, and then you're also dealing with a hot Sacramento team for the rest of the night. And the Warriors did a hell of a job of what I felt like almost stealing that game. Like they were just hanging around, and I know the Warriors hit a bunch of threes themselves, and Kuminga was awesome with the 31 and getting the job done in the paint and all the isolations and a little bit of a shift maybe in offense to try and let Kuminga thrive a little bit more with some of those short post little isolations, letting him drive to the bucket and get fouled and all of that. But it's time for Draymond to be back in the starting lineup. The question though becomes, is it Draymond and Looney because you're going up against Anthony Davis and LeBron James, or is it Draymond and Kuminga with Wiggins, Klay Thompson, and Stephen Curry? I'm inclined to roll it out with Draymond and Kuminga at this point, but it keeps coming back to I think the Warriors really like right now, again, not an indictment of Jonathan Kuminga's future, and he's shown a level up of late. I think the Warriors kind of like Kuminga's ability to be a big-time bench scorer, and with that bench unit, somebody that can look to cook, look to shoot it a lot, and try and dominate on the inside and put pressure on the defense. He will be part of the closing lineup if he plays the way that he's played, but maybe he's somebody that you sort of save for that offensive push, because he's much more of an offensive-only player right now than a two-way player right now, which is fine. He did have a couple of miscues, one at the end of the third quarter, one on the Sabonis dunk that proved to be the game winner with the team defense, which continues to kind of plague him a little bit. But offensively, he's bringing it in a big-time way, in a way that the Warriors really need. And so I think that's going to become the question. I think Draymond is in tonight. The question is it Draymond and Looney, or is it Draymond and Kuminga with Wiggins, Klay, and Steph?
Well, JD, talking about Kuminga, I am in the belief right now that I really like him in the bench role, and totally with you that it is not an indictment of his abilities and how he's been playing lately. I think Kuminga plays more freely when he doesn't have to share the court with Steph, Klay, and Wiggins sometimes in terms of taking shots, but at least a lot of high volume shooters, and Kuminga can just go and play his game. And I've said this before on the show, and I'll say it again. Not starting doesn't mean as much to me as not closing. And with the way Jonathan Kuminga has been playing, he should be in the closing lineup. So I'm good with having Kuminga be a nice little spark plug off the bench and a great source of offense. And if he's having one of those nights like he's had for the better part of the last month and a half, absolutely put him in the closing lineup there with Draymond, with Steph Curry, probably a Klay Thompson and maybe an Andrew Wiggins?
Yeah, I think that's the way you look at the potential closing lineups. And I know everybody freaked out when Steve Kerr took him out of the game there for a minute. He had played 13 consecutive minutes in the game the other night, and so you're not going to play him basically the final 20 minutes. So he took him out, tried to give him a rest. Unfortunately, the Warriors immediately allowed the Kings to hit a couple of buckets, and they found themselves, I think, down 5 real quick, 5 or 6 real quick, and then had to sort of start the uphill climb again. But it's funny. There were a couple people on press row that were kind of even like, what is going on? Like, why is he taking him out? And I'm like, he's taking him out because he's going to put him back in. Like, he's taking him out because he played 13 straight minutes and was impactful. And you want to have him, try to get a little bit of a mini break and then come back to finish those final, what ended up being 5 minutes. I think he was going to try to give him maybe 2 minutes. And the Kings had hit a couple of buckets, and the Warriors kind of went dry there for 2 possessions. And so it's all right, quick timeout, but it's the old timeout to get the guys that you want back into the game, So 808 KNBR is the number. A lot to get into. It's John Dickinson here. It's just Dubs with JD talking all things NBA and Warriors basketball as we roll on here on a Saturday. Appreciate everybody on YouTube and Twitch. 808 KNBR, the number to give us a call or shoot us a text on 104.5 and 680, the sports leader.
JD on a Saturday just feels right.
This is KNBR, and this is Just Dubs with John Dickinson, streaming live on YouTube at KNBR 1045.
Well, here comes Draymond Green. He's been out for over a month. Checking in with Kuminga and Podziemski. Draymond an open three. Draymond Green is actually leading the Warriors in three-point shooting. It's true. Roddy. There was Draymond to turn him away. That was the return of Draymond Green right there. Played the D, got the rebound, and he saved a layup. Broke that play up.
Yeah, Draymond Green, 3 games in to his return from suspension. I think so far so good as far as Draymond's individual performance goes, but also his ability to compete and not be mixing it up with the refs, not be mixing it up necessarily with other players and putting himself in positions where he's picking up techs and or getting himself suspended again. I think he's been pretty under control in the 3 games, which is a positive sign. Malik Monk was trying to maybe bait him a little bit. Those two were going at it some in the game on Thursday night. You know, opponents are going to try to do everything they possibly can to get Draymond off the mark. But so far, Dre, I think, can have control when he wants to have control, when he's completely locked in and knows that he has to have control. I think he's better at it than maybe it has appeared from time to time. But that obviously is the number one thing, because Draymond, and Mike Dunleavy Jr. said this when Draymond was suspended going back to last month in December, and it was basically, hey, Draymond has been a productive player for the Warriors, but he has not been available nearly enough. And that's been a major problem as far as, I think, the defensive inconsistencies. You know, the Warriors just do not have enough quality defenders on their team. You know, you've got Draymond, you've got Gary Payton II, who's also been out with Draymond out, and then you've got Andrew Wiggins, who those 3 are really good defenders. You know, Kevon Looney against bigs hasn't been as effective as maybe he's been in the past, but he's been a pretty good big defender. I think Trace Jackson-Davis has had an impact in some points as another big, but beyond that, the Warriors really do not have. You know, Podziemski will take some charges. They don't have great defenders, and so the system has to be on point, and you have to have the guys that you do have that are elite defenders be able to be on the floor and hold down the foundation. You know, that coupled with the fact that, you know, Steph Curry's always a willing defender. Klay Thompson used to be somebody that you could throw on the point guards and the 2 guards that were ball dominant and quick. Like Klay Thompson, you know, defensively, he used to be the guy you'd put on De'Aaron Fox, and he would cover that De'Aaron Fox and hold him down and make life difficult. You know, now he's somebody that you almost have to put on Harrison Barnes, and on a night in, night out basis, there are some players of the Harrison Barnes ilk. It's really matchup specific. There are some guys that Klay can hold his own against. I think typically the slower, more plodding guys, the stronger, more agile wing players have really been able to put it on him. And Harrison Barnes put it on him in the game on Thursday night. And, you know, the Warriors, I think some of it was trying to force things to Harrison Barnes, force him to be one of the guys that beat him. But he cooked him, and he cooked him from deep, and he cooked him on the interior. And so, you know, Draymond, we discuss his return a little bit there, as he stays consistent and continues to play, I think it does help the Warriors' overall defense. But part of the reason the Warriors' defense has been so bad is because they don't have enough good individual defenders, and their team defense is completely out of whack, basically, when Draymond isn't around at all. So 808 KNBR, it's Just Dubs with JD. We got Greg Silver here as well. 808 KNBR, the number to give us a call or shoot us a text. Let's get things rolling on the phone lines here this segment with Jake in San Francisco on the Sports Leader. Hey, Jake.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Good. Doing well.
Good. Hey, I earlier in the show, you were mentioning a Dario Saric trade, and I was wondering like what the point of that would be, like who the Warriors would try to get in return for someone like Dario, because he seems to fit the system and be found money, and I don't know what value you could get for a guy like that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jake, and thank you for the call. Appreciate it. I'll answer it off the air. No, I wasn't so much saying a Dario Saric trade, and to your point, he does fit the Warrior system, especially offensively. Defensively, there's been issues from time to time, and it's funny. Saric, even though he started of late, has played better with the bench group than he has with the starting group, and that was, I think, part of the defensive struggles the Warriors had against the Kings the other night. But offensively, he was helped keeping them in the game. So, no, it wasn't so much Saric specific, and I think the Warriors do like Saric as a connector because of his ability to shoot and pass, and believe that he's somebody that needs to be on this team because of his skill set, even with players like Kuminga and Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins, if those guys are going to continue to be around. So, no, I wasn't saying trade Saric. The bigger picture question, though, Greg, is do the Warriors find themselves in 2 weeks in a position where, okay, they're going to keep Steph and Klay and Draymond, but you're also going to keep Kuminga and Moody and Podziemski and Trace Jackson-Davis? Well, that right there is 7 players. You've got the young wave players and the core 3 players. The question then becomes, I think, Looney and Saric and Chris Paul and maybe even Gary Payton II, although I think he would be the one guy among the veteran group that the Warriors would be the most like to just hang on to and say, all right, we need this guy, we need his defense, we love having him on the team, he's a good fit, plays well with Steph, all those things. But it would be those veteran players that would be the players that you would basically be looking to move, because they're not the core 3 and they're not the young draft picks that you've liked the way that they've played when they've had opportunities to play of late. So I think it's more almost putting players into 3 different groups that basically becomes 2 different groups as you get to the trade deadline, if you want to keep the young guys that you've most recently drafted.
Yeah, and I think the question of the season has been, are we trying to make a run this year with the core like we said we were going to do in the offseason, or is it, are we really playing for next year and the remainder of Steph's career as a Warrior? And that's kind of the big, hard conversation topic that Mike Dunleavy Jr. and Steve Kerr and Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Klay Thompson are all going to have, because the last 2 weeks it's been, well, we need more information and we'll find out in the next couple weeks. And then it's like, part of it is the Warriors had a week off, which we didn't expect. But another part of it is we continue to see the same levels of inconsistency where you take a game like the Atlanta game where they catch fire in the second half and they don't let another team back into the game, and they just kind of step on their throat, which is something they really haven't done much of this year.
Yeah, they've done that about 5 times this year.
Right. And then you see games like the Chicago game where it was like, that's a great way to respond on the road after the Bulls were on fire in the second quarter. But then you get games like the Grizzlies game where it's, how do you not win that game that doesn't have 5 of their 6 best players? And the one guy, Jaren Jackson Jr., that was playing was terrible offensively, and you still lost that game pretty convincingly. So it's just like, you get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I think that if that's going to be the case and it's going to be a team that's floating around 500, maybe a little bit below, you got to make changes and probably just mail it in for this season. And I hate to say that as people that are doing shows for every Warriors game, but I'm also trying to be realistic to the approach that the front office and the coaching staff and the core players might be having with each other at this point in late January.
808 KNBR, let's keep it moving on the phones. We got a lot of people that want to talk, and next up is Mark in Millbrae here on The Sports Leader. It's Just Dubs on a Saturday. What's going on, Mark?
Hey, what's up, man? The game against Sacramento the other night, just very bitter about the way that game ended. That's a game you should have had. I wish Curry would have set it up there for Draymond to get him in the pass instead of just dribbling it up and to not even get a shot off. And that's one of the reasons why the Warriors find themselves is they've kicked so many games away, especially in crucial late game situations, and why they find themselves right now down the bottom of the West. In terms of the lineup now, I think it's time to have Draymond back in the starting lineup. I think they need that aggressiveness. They need that mentality from Draymond brings. Saric back to the bench. And as far as Kuminga, keep him where he is because he's thriving right now. I love the way Kuminga's playing. This guy should be playing major minutes right now. He's showing he should be part of your core. I don't know long-term if he wants to be here. I think he might be a free agent or maybe have an option year after this season. But if this kid continues to surge like he is right now, he's showing he's going to be one of your core pieces. As far as the team overall, I don't know what the rumors are about Clay, but I'd be willing to move off him. I want to get your take on. I know the guys that we've talked about. A lot of people have talked about Siakam, Anunoby. They've already moved, but I'm really fascinated by having a guy like DeJounte Murray. And if there's any way the Warriors can pull that off, getting him, because I think to me he's a better upgrade of Clay. If you put him on this team right now, with the way he can play lockdown defense, he can score, he can play off the ball. And I think he's just a better all-around younger version of Clay with more athleticism. I would love to see him play, but I don't think they want Wiggins or anything else. They want young pieces and pick some. What do you think it would take to pull a trade like a guy like DeJounte Murray? Because I think he would be the perfect guy to pair with Curry in the new-look Warriors. And finally, with the play-in, I don't think it's the loser mentality to say we're not playing for anything. Because you see the Miami Heat were flounging like the Warriors are last year. They made it to the finals. Now, obviously, will the Warriors make a run to the finals? Probably not. But even the Lakers, they got to the Final Four. So I just think with the playing, you can't just say we're just going to give up on the season and compete for what? Nothing? So you got to keep it intact. Look at the bottom of the West. This team's still good enough to make a run. And look at the top of the West. They're playing young teams. It's not even the Nuggets right now are struggling. So don't give up hope, man. Thanks for the time.
No, I appreciate it, Mark. You got to play it out. You got to play it out. You got to try to win as many games as you possibly can here over the course of the next 2 weeks, and then just see where you're at come February 8th. And look, if this team loses a couple here, the next two before they go on the road, then it becomes an even more difficult climb. I mean, that's where the Sacramento game, just on result, is a real crusher. Because you could have been all right 2 in a row, building momentum. Now you're 2 under. You're only 1 game out of 10th. You feel like you have a little bit of positive momentum building. At least you take your chances tonight. You're right there, very close to the Lakers. You beat the Lakers tonight after you win the first 2, and all of a sudden you are back into that top 10 because you'd basically knock the Lakers to a point where they'd be under 500 and you'd have the same record. So you got to keep playing. You got to play it out. DeJounte Murray. I like Greg. The more I've looked at him, the more I do think he would be a fit. But this is a guy that's also going to be an unrestricted free agent come the summer. And so, if you're trading for him, you have to know that he's going to want to be able to come back. But yeah, I think he's a good defender. I think he is a nice compliment. He's not a shooter. He's a guy that he's streaky from 3, but is not historically a great 3-point shooter. And so, you're bringing him in. You're going to need shooting around him, especially if you're going to build something with maybe Kuminga and Draymond and look to maybe go that direction moving forward. But DeJounte Murray is a name that I find interesting depending upon if you could keep him around and whether you would want to, whether he would be willing to sign, but also I think he would be the guy that you would be bringing in because you're essentially announcing to the world that Klay Thompson wouldn't be back.
Yeah, right. That's the underlying premise with all the DeJounte.
Or he's going to just start playing the three, and you're going to play the three of them together. He's just going to become a starter at the three. I mean, I shouldn't rule that out.
I don't want to rule that out either, but it's also not something I love, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, we've seen the three-guard lineup with Klay at the three with Chris Paul and Steph Curry or Brandon Pajemski and Steph Curry. It's not an amazing defensive lineup when you consider where Klay Thompson is at physically. That's no knock on him. I mean, to come back from 2 injuries and still be a very good NBA player is tough. But you said it. He was the guy that was guarding Kyrie Irving, Russell Westbrook, De'Aaron Fox, the best guard on the other team. And he is no longer the guy that's capable of that. I like DeJounte Murray a lot. And you hit the nail on the head, JD. It's the same thing as the Pascal Siakam situation. Well, you're not going to make the trade and you're not going to make the sacrifice if you can't get him to sign long term. I think playing in a backcourt with Steph Curry is not only a great incentive, I think that's probably the only incentive for somebody to consider the Golden State Warriors as a destination. Like, hey, look, this season's not going well, but the dynasty isn't just crumbling into full bits where there's no hope looking forward. You still have one of the elite players in the entire world to be by your side. They just need the right pieces, and they have a bunch of solid players that just haven't really fit together, and nobody has really been consistent enough outside of Steph Curry, and even he's hit a little bit of a mini slump since the new year. So I'm intrigued by DeJounte Murray for sure, but everyone loves to play the game. Oh, let's just get him. It's like, you get DeJounte Murray, you're probably moving on from Klay Thompson.
Well, and DeJounte Murray, by the way, 34-6 from three for his career, 38-8 this year. So this year, that's well within the acceptable range. Under 40, which is obviously excellent, but I think close enough at 38-8 to where, is that more of an outlier? Again, that's higher than his career average, but that's something you would take. And I think the question then would become, I mean, he's a player that's a $17.7 million player right now. What does his contract look like moving forward? It's obviously going to be north of that. Or is he somebody that's going to be, borderline max or want a max? Rich Paul and Clutch is his agency, but he's only 27. And so I think, that's a player to where if you were going to be signing him to a big-time deal, you're getting him 27, 28, 29, 30, or 28, 29, 30, 31, not, 30 to 34. So I think you would like that part of it as well. 808 KNBR, Paul and Folsom is next here on the Sports Leader.
Hey, John. Great show. I appreciate listening, and you guys do a great job. And look, watching all these games, I think the issue is that they are who they are, and unless something major changes, I think we're going to kind of see, the Warriors for who they are. I think the big question I have for you guys is the elephant in the room is Steve Kerr. And the interesting thing about this is I'm kind of wondering what would change in his mind or in the Warriors' mind to move it one direction or the other. I mean, this is a 4-time champ coach of the Warriors. Bob Myers left. That was kind of under the wraps until the end. But it seems like this is more, sort of indicative of just the overall cloud over the team. It just seems like there's not a ton of chemistry. And what do you think's going through Kerr's mind in all this? Do you think the mind's made up? Because, having a coach without a contract when you're trying to win a championship is not something you see very often. So I'm just wondering what you guys feel about how this plays out, and what do you think would change for Kerr to either move one direction or the other, or for the Warriors to move one direction or the other? May not be up to Kerr, maybe up to Lake, I don't know. But what do you guys think about Kerr? It just seems really odd that this is kind of something that's undecided.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It reminds me of Bob Myers last year, where it kept not getting done. And what would Bob Myers say every time he would be asked about it? Well, I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it. And I'm not worried about it was, as it turns out, I'm not worried about it because I'm leaving at the end of the year. And I think while Bob didn't formally make that decision until May, I think he had pretty much made that decision in the lead up to May. So it makes me wonder. Now, I've said this, Greg, and we've discussed it a little bit. I think Steve Kerr would be fine and even enjoy coaching either a young team that was developing players. Like, I think he kind of views that as a myth that he can't develop or wouldn't be comfortable coaching a young team that's developing. I think he would coach a young team. I think he would be cool coaching a team with Steph, Clay, and Draymond, or Steph and Draymond with maybe a new player from the outside and the four guys that they've just drafted. In kind of a balance of continue to develop them, but continue to have the thing that I don't think Steve Kerr wants to do is, I think he doesn't want to coach a young team or a team that's in a semi-rebuild while you're also stating that the goal is to win an NBA championship. Like, that's the part that I think has not meshed, right? It's develop these guys, but you're contending for a championship. So you better get the right lineups on the court every night to win enough to contend for a championship, but you better also be developing the guys and playing them enough. Like, that to me is a bunch of that's a bunch of crap. Like, that's just that, like, and so I think that's where maybe the frustration has been. It's not that he is unwilling or can't do it or isn't even good at it. I know a lot of Warrior fans probably disagree with that, and that's fine. We can have a conversation about it. But to me, it's more, what's your expectation? Because I think Steve Kerr would be willing to develop players if you're developing players without, basically when you're saying, all right, we're a young developing team now. Now, you're not going to want to do that ever with Stephen Curry completely, but I also think Stephen Curry and Draymond Green and Klay Thompson, if Klay Thompson's around, want Steve Kerr to be the coach. So if the Warriors are thinking about making a move, to me, the only reason the Warriors would be thinking about making a move is if they are going to move in a different direction off of trying to contend for championships. But Stephen Curry would have to have the buy-in on that, similar to the way Bob Myers went to Steve and went to Steph and said, hey, I'm out. And Steph basically said, I tried to talk him out of it. But I respect the decision. I wonder if there's a similar conversation potentially coming between Steve and between Steph. So 808 KNBR is the number. Let's sneak one more in here. Emilio in San Francisco is next on the Sports Leader. Hey, Emilio.
Hey, what's going on, fellas? Just going to talk to you a little bit about the financials here. But first, there aren't many people that have raised the Larry O'Brien trophy as many times as Steve Kerr. And I think he's just got to trust that he knows what he's doing. But I think the roster situation, it's difficult with what's happened this season. But when you look at your outlook and you've got non-guaranteed Chris Paul, you've got to re-sign Kevon Looney, you've got an uncertain situation with Klay Thompson, you've got Kuminga's extension coming up. You look at the roster and you say, okay, let's say we just go status quo or we make a minor change here or there. With the aging roster, can you compete to get out of the West, to get to the finals again in the next 2 years? And when you look at the roster, it doesn't look like Moody's turned it on the way we need it. Doesn't look like, Kuminga's getting the playing time. So you kind of look at the situation, you're like, okay, Chris Paul is non-guaranteed. Can we get off of his contract and get some kind of return that we take a longer-term contract? And then you look at Wiggins, and it's like, what do we do? Are we going to have to pay to get off of this thing? And we just caught lightning in a bottle the year we won the championship. So I just wanted to get your sensation there. When you're looking at the roster construction from the cap sense, which is very severe and built to beat down a team like the Warriors, when you look at the pieces you have with what's going to be available on the trade market or really nothing on the free agent market for a little while, how do you play that out?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and thanks for the call. Emilio, we're up against it, so we're going to pause and come back at the top of the 11 o'clock hour, and I'm going to dive right into the answers to your question because I think it's fascinating. We got to get into the YouTube chat as well. 808 KNBR is the number. We got 1 hour down, 1 hour to come. It's Just Dubs with JD, John Dickinson, Greg Silver as well here on 104.5 and 680, the Sports Leader.
KNBR and KNBR FM, your home of San Francisco 49ers football. Live from downtown.
Hurry, way downtown. Bang! Bang!
This is Just Dubs with John Dickinson on the Sports Leader. Streaming live at KNBR.com and on the KNBR app.
Well, it's certainly something we want to shore up. No question about it. I mean, especially the last 10, 15 games. Our defense has really struggled, and getting Draymond back, I think, will help. A lot of times it's hard, though, with the trade deadline to bring in a player or players that are just going to dramatically improve your defense. So, look, if that player is available, we'll look to pursue it. But I think it's got to come from within, and that comes from everybody. That's coaches, that's players, that's the whole deal of kind of tighten this thing up and find a way to be better defensively, because, frankly, offensively, we've been great. I mean, the last 12, 15 games, right. And Steph's, he, by his own admission, he hasn't played his best, right. And we've been number one in the league in offense. So if we can kind of get this defensive stuff right, we feel like the offense, taking care of the ball better, guys are emerging like JK, we could be in good shape, but we gotta put it all together, and we got to get going here.
All right, Warriors General Manager Mike Dunleavy Jr. on NBC Sports Bay Area. Some interesting comments there. Hour number 2, Just Dubs, John Dickinson, Greg Silver here on KNBR, the Sports Leader. Happy with the offense, and I think the numbers would dictate for the most part that the Warriors should be happy with the offense, but defensively the issues have remained. How much does Draymond Green's return impact that? You've still got Andrew Wiggins and Gary Payton II, his return on the horizon. Wiggins in the fold as well. And so that, Greg, and I want to get back to Emilio's call from before the top of the hour because he had a lot of things I wanted to use as a jumping off point here in hour number 2. That leads me to think that standing pat is much more on the table than I would have anticipated given the overall status of this Warriors team at this point.
Yeah, and I know that's going to really rile up a lot of fans because part of it's just the sports landscape we live in today in 2024 with a lot of impatience and people wanting it now and in the moment. But I don't know, JD. I've been kind of thinking they're going to make a move of some sort for many, many weeks, and then the tragedy with Decky happened, and they came back. And that was kind of when I was like, maybe you're right. Maybe they won't. Because I thought there was a really high chance somebody was getting moved come 2 weeks from now. But I don't know. Now I'm kind of a lot more on the fence with it.
Well, and Emilio's call brought up a number of different specific question marks, right? What do you do with Looney? Is he somebody that you're going to want to have on this team moving forward? And I think the Warriors would love to have Kevon Looney on this team moving forward. But the production has not been there from Kevon Looney this season as it has been in years past. And, the other, I think, elephant in the room is Steph and Draymond are going to be here. That I think we know for a fact. Like, Steph and Draymond together, Mike Dunleavy Jr. said it. We alluded to it in the first hour of the show. Draymond's issue has been the temper and doing things that take him off the floor. When Draymond Green's on the floor, Draymond Green is still the anchor of the Warriors defense. He's still somebody that plays the two-man game with Stephen Curry better than anybody. Like, those two I feel like are, at this point, with him being signed for as long as he is, those two are connected. Like, those two are not going anywhere moving forward here. And then Jonathan Kuminga is the young player with the most value. But I think when you look at the way that he's played of late, I mean, you want to hang on to him unless you're going to be taking back somebody that's a superstar, right? Or at least a star, all-star caliber player, because the trajectory of Kuminga, you like the fact that he's helping you now, but you like the potential of what he could be as he continues to grow as still a very young player. The question, though, and Emilio brought this up, was, well, Kuminga's going to be doing extension, and what do you do with that? Look, I've said this. I'll reiterate. The Warriors don't have to do an extension with Kuminga. Like, he's due for one, and will probably want one in the summer and in the fall is the deadline to do one with him. But he's a under contract player for next year, and as long as the Warriors give him a qualifying offer, which they would, he would be a restricted free agent. So the Warriors would have the ability to match any deal with Jonathan Kuminga if it got to that point where he was a restricted free agent, needed to go out. And so to the point I'm getting at is maybe they do an extension, maybe they don't, maybe they wait. There's no rush. There's no pressure to sign Kuminga. Like, if the Warriors want Jonathan Kuminga to be on the Warriors, Jonathan Kuminga will be on the Warriors for the rest of this year, next year, and if they want, 4 more years beyond. Like, it is completely within their control. And so there's no panic or rush to have to feel like you have to give him some massive extension right now. Now, Klay Thompson is another big question. And I think the Warriors have to ask themselves, stalemate's probably too strong of a word, but it feels a little bit like a stalemate when you read the reports and what Anthony Slater had put out there about him still believing, Klay, that he's a star-level wing and basically should be paid as such. Well, that leads me to think what I already believed, which is that Klay Thompson believes he's still a $40 million player. Klay Thompson is not right now, January 27th, 2024, a $40 million player. can the Warriors come to some kind of balance of, I know people have said, oh, he's a $15 million player. No, Klay, he's probably a $20 to $25 million player minimum. It's not a matter of, is it going to be, 10 to 15, because it's not. And it's not a matter of, is it going to be 40 plus, which I don't think it will be. The Warriors would gulp at that. It's, can you find the in-between ground? It's, would Klay do a 3 and 75? That I think is the question on Klay. Does Klay have to be a 3? And if Klay has to be a 3, then it would open the door toward Kuminga being the 4 and Draymond potentially being the 5. And then if Klay is your 3 now, then maybe that leads you down a path where you could look to move Wiggins, because the Warriors still don't view Kuminga as a 3. Our weekly reminder, although he did play 3 for about 2.5 minutes in the game against Sacramento the other night. But Wiggins was at the 2, was kind of insane, a big lineup, big lineup in terms of length. But then the question would be, so it's twofold with Klay. If Klay's going to be a 3, well, then you need a replacement 2. And that guy maybe isn't on the roster currently. If you're going to move on from Klay, you would need a replacement 2. And that's where I think a guy like DeJounte Murray comes in and would be appealing. And would the Warriors be willing to have the open-ended conversation with Klay to where they agree that they can't come to an agreement in the next couple of weeks? And would you look to maybe make a move on Klay at that point? I don't foresee that. I think that's a let it play out till the end of the year and then figure out if common ground can be had once another team or other teams, the rest of the league, get involved and Klay has a better feel for what his true value over the whole league is.
JD, I got a question for you, actually.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. There's a lot to. I want to get to CP3 after that, but no, jump in,
because I do want to jump to something you've brought up, particularly around the time of the Chris Paul injury, which is Brandon Podziemski and the fact that he hasn't really played a lot of true point guard for the Warriors. So when you talk about possible replacement 2s, where do you see Brandon Podziemski fitting in this conversation?
I mean, do you want to make him your starting 2 guard next year? I'll ask you. Would you want to make Podziemski because that's what the Warriors are going to have to ask themselves. I don't know that I would want to make Brandon. So you're going to start Steph, Podziemski. Let's say Klay Thompson's gone. You're going to start Steph, Podziemski, Wiggins, Kuminga, and Draymond. That's your penciled in. Is that? But that is along the lines of you're keeping the Steph and Draymond, but then you're also developing, but you're also saying that team's not good enough to contend for a championship. I think you would have to say that at that point. So maybe you are comfortable with that if you're just a team that's trying to win in the low 40s and get into the playoffs. Maybe that becomes acceptable, but I don't know. I don't think that would be. I don't think that would be the preferred plan, although it's definitely an option that the Warriors are going to have to look at if they wind up not retaining Klay Thompson and also not replacing him with a better player than Podziemski from the outside. I feel like there's an in-between ground there, right? There's got to be better players than Podziemski that maybe aren't Klay Thompson that the Warriors could get to be the new starting 2 if they wind up moving off of Klay Thompson.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I agree that I don't think Brandon Podziemski is necessarily your starting 2, but could he be someone that's good enough to be a 6th or 7th man type of role and a really reliable piece off the bench? I don't think not yet necessarily. I also would go out on a limb and say I don't think it's that far away for someone, a tough guard who plays defense, puts his body on the line, and grabs rebounds. I mean, that's just something that has really helped the Warriors this year, and he's a rookie doing this with the way he plays at the NBA level and has been so farther along mentally to adjust to the speed of this game than I think any of us would have expected evaluating him coming out of Santa Clara and into the draft. I don't think it's outrageous for Podziemski to be a viable 6th or 7th man, even if maybe that's not your plan A.
No, I think that's definitely possible. I think the other thing that this leads to is as people have said, well, what does a soft rebuild look like? Well, a soft rebuild, I think, is exactly this. A soft rebuild would be you still have Steph and Draymond, maybe Klay's gone, Kuminga's a starter at the 4, Podziemski's a starter at the 2, Looney's gone, which means Trace Jackson-Davis is the backup, the primary backup 5, right? And so, you still need shooting at that point. Like, I don't think you have enough shooting. We're what, 6 deep now, right? If it's Steph, Podziemski, Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond, Trace Jackson-Davis as I'm not saying Trace Jackson-Davis is the 6th man, but he would be the 6th guy that you'd be keeping in this alignment. And so, at that point you would need more shooting. You probably need more defense. If Moses Moody's still around, he would be a guy that would probably be the 7th. And then you would have to balance out the rest of the roster from there. But to me, that gets into the definition of what when people say what's a soft rebuild, that's a soft rebuild, right? You've got 2 young players in the starting lineup that you're high on. You've got 2 young players who are primary off the bench players that you're pretty high on. And then, but you still have Wiggins, who serves a purpose and has played well with Kuminga and Draymond. Like, those 3 have worked together, and then you still have Steph and Draymond. So what does a soft rebuild look like? To me, that's what a soft rebuild looks like, where you move off of Klay, either maybe he leaves in the offseason, and then the interesting part, and this gets back to Emilio, Greg, and the call before the top of the hour, which is, what do you do with Chris Paul? And would you, if you're the Warriors, be willing to trade Chris Paul at the trade deadline and bring back a player that makes similar money to Chris Paul, but for more years moving forward? Here's the interesting part about that, though. The Warriors don't have to do it at the deadline because Chris Paul has another one of those options for next year that turn into that basically his money turns into 0. So the Warriors could do it still in the summer, the way that Chris Paul was traded last year, and have a team basically waive him and take on that money. Then it's a non-guaranteed $30 million. So he would remain on the Warriors roster and not be a free agent at the end of this year. And then in the summer, you trade him for a $30 million player. The team that gets him waives him because the $30 million is non-guaranteed, and that team then saves the $30 million. So I think the Chris Paul decision, Greg, is a decision that I think we've lumped in as it has to be made in the next 2 weeks. The Chris Paul decision does not have to be made in the next 2 weeks, and the Warriors could still use him as a chip to bring back another player this offseason, even if they look to – and maybe that player that they take back for Chris Paul leads them down a path where then – okay, now maybe Klay Thompson's not coming back because they acquired player X, or maybe they want to trade Andrew Wiggins because they acquired player X. It doesn't all have to be done in the panic of the next 12 days.
I'm glad we're talking about Chris Paul because I have an opinion on this, and it might be an unpopular opinion, and Chris Paul's one of those players where I am open to any and every discussion on because I think there are valid points from many different angles. My belief is that the Warriors should keep Chris Paul and at least let him come back from the injury, not blow him off at the trade deadline. And it's tricky, right? Because I think Chris Paul has actually done an excellent job at what he was brought in to do. All the way back in June when the trade was made with Jordan Poole, I was very pro-trade because everyone's like, I don't know. I mean, we even talked about it here in the studio in KNBR. Some people were not really feeling it, and I said, well, listen, you made a big mistake by giving Poole that amount of money for a contract, and you were able to get rid of that for a guy that needs, he only has it for 1 year. Chris Paul wasn't supposed to be the ultimate solution, but he helped you in that regard financially, and I think he's actually done a good job of being steady, helping the second unit, and not turning the ball over. Now, on the other hand, I totally understand when people say it's a problem defensively. He's slow, he's old, he can't stay healthy. Yes, all of those things are also true. He is not – it is a tough backcourt there to have Steph Curry and Chris Paul. But I don't think I'm in the camp of get rid of him for this year because you don't have – you're right. The number's 0 in June, and it resets. So I don't know what your take is on that, JD, but I'm kind of in the camp of keep the guy. I think for what he was brought in to do, he's actually done very well.
Well, yeah, I mean, my take on it is you don't have to panic. And yeah, you can bring him back. The question, though, is, and this is the other thing that the Warriors have to answer, Greg, is if you're going to have Chris Paul come back from injury and finish this season, knowing full well that you could still trade him in the offseason and use his contract as a chip in the offseason, how does his return, how does Moses Moody's return, how does Gary Payton II's return, how does that align with the players that you currently have on the roster who are playing and playing effectively, right? Mike Dunleavy Jr. said, hey, the offense has been great, even with Steph struggling more of late. The defense hasn't been there. Draymond's back. Wiggins is in the starting lineup again. Let's see if that can help fix the defense. GP2, I think, helps fix the defense. But the issue is it's sort of where we were 2 and 3 weeks ago with this notion that the Warriors have to make this 2-for-1, 3-for-1 deal to clear some of the glut and get the right players playing again. So I think, to me, if you're not going all in to make the play-in tournament or make the playoffs, try to at least over the last 2 months, I do think the Chris Paul thing becomes problematic because he would be the guy that you could make the case shouldn't be playing if younger players are going to play. Like if you're going soft developmental mode because you don't think you're going all in to make the play-in tournament, then he probably shouldn't be playing. And if he probably shouldn't be playing, then you probably should be trading him. So to me, it's more about that, whereas the benefit of him, like I think Chris Paul's benefit more now really than his actual play on the court is the ability for the Warriors to use him in the offseason as a trade chip once they have a clear picture of Klay Thompson's situation and Andrew Wiggins' clarity as to whether they're going to keep him or not, and the overall financial gymnastics that would have to be made. But if you're keeping Chris Paul beyond the trade deadline, then I think you kind of owe it to Chris Paul to keep him playing and to go for it. Otherwise, you would sort of owe it to Chris Paul to be on another roster that would be contending for a championship.
Yeah, no, I hear you on all that. And sorry, was just getting a couple production things sorted away as we were
all good.
Getting into that. I actually think in the true spirit of a producer, why don't we take a pause now so that we're not too crammed coming back for the final stretch here?
Yeah, we'll do that. 808 KNBR is the number. We're getting into the YouTube chat coming back next as well. Your questions, your comments. Appreciate everybody watching on YouTube and Twitch. We got a couple of hours here flying by. It's just Dubs with John Dickinson. Greg Silver's on hand. We got Dubs OT tonight following the Warriors and the Lakers. Join me at Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City. That is the new home for all of the Dubs OT shows for games that are played in San Francisco. So look forward to that. 808 KNBR, it's KNBR 104.5 and 680, the sports leader.
Dub Nation, this is the real and inside story on Warriors basketball. Just Dubs with John Dickinson now continues, streaming live at twitch.tv/thesportsleader.
For sure, we wanted to get him the ball more and to put him in more spots to attack. And he's a young guy. This is his third year, and it's kind of a natural time for him to really start to come into his own and feel how he can impact the game. And we've shown him a lot of the numbers, his shot chart, anything in the paint, he's elite. He just, the way he explodes and can get over people, through people. So we're just trying to emphasize to him, the more he's around the paint, the more he's attacking, the better. Last night was obviously incredible night, 11 for 11, but I think only 2 of those hoops were outside the paint. So he really did a great job of attacking, and I feel like he's really growing in his awareness of where he can really make the biggest impact.
All right, Steve Kerr there on Jonathan Kuminga, as Kuminga playing very well of late. 5 20-plus point games in the last 5, career-high 31 against the Kings. And, yeah, Steve Kerr shorted him there. It was actually 10 of the 11 buckets, only 1 coming outside of the paint. And when he's going to the basket decisively and when he's playing at his very best, that shot chart is all paint points. And Kuminga has been bringing that to the table of late and helping the Warriors and basically, I think, putting himself in the conversation of being untouchable. I know it was reported that Warriors didn't want to move Kuminga even 2-3 weeks ago. You can understand why. And look, I think the Warriors, and I've said, needed to be more open-minded going back a couple of weeks ago based on the production level at that point and potential players that would be out there. And the Warriors' record a couple of weeks ago was better than it is now. And so I think at that point, you had to be more open-minded toward potentially looking to move him in a deal if it could bring a player back that could really help push this team forward. I'm not sure that deal exists. And, oh, by the way, Kuminga has played himself at a much higher level. And so that, I think, has put him in a category now where if he's not untouchable, he's getting closer to being untouchable, at least at this trade deadline, which is coming up in the next 12 days. I want to see more of what he can provide with Draymond and even with Wiggins, to be perfectly honest. I'm equally not in the you have to trade Wiggins, get rid of Wiggins at all costs. To me, where this Warriors team has the ability to be at their best is if Kuminga and Wiggins can play together and can play together with Draymond Green. All right, 808 KNBR is the number. I do want to get a couple here in the YouTube chat before we get back to the phones. Woodpit 420, we were talking about Klay Thompson's contract. They should give Klay a 3-year deal for like 55. I still think that's not. That's what, about $18 million. Think north of 20. Think more like 3 and 75. I think for Klay Thompson as far as the offer. Funky Fresh Flow TV. Kuminga needs to stay on the bench. Period. That was a topic earlier on in the show. Funky Fresh Flow also adding he's a huge liability in the last few minutes. That's why they lost against Sac. He was trying to do too much. I think he's becoming like Poole, trying to be the show. Bad shot selection. I don't know. I think the Warriors were going to him because he was on down the stretch. I think the Kings felt if they could get even 1 or 2 stops, that was probably going to be enough, even though his overall game was extremely efficient. I think they thought that was probably going to be enough to sway the game in their way. The defensive miscues were the big issue. But again, the guy's scoring 31 points, and the Warriors need the offense too. But yeah, he had the miscommunication that led to the dunk that was the game winner, and he allowed the Harrison Barnes three-pointer at the end of the third quarter. 5 points at the end of both of those quarters that, when you lose by 1, proved to be important as well. And so. Yeah, and then George Hart with the other side of that. We nitpick the kid's every mistake. Meanwhile, he's probably the third best defender on the team. I don't know that he's the third best defender on the team. Draymond, Wiggins, GP, Beyond that, maybe we can start having a conversation. I think Podziemski's a willing defender who does draw charges, which is good defense. I'm not saying Podziemski's the fourth best defender either, but there is a significant drop off for the Warriors after Draymond, Wiggins, and GP2. Like, they are kind of in their own category, and then draw a line, and then there's everybody else. So more from the YouTube chat coming up here on The Sports Leader. But do want to get back to the phones with Danny in Vancouver next here on The Sports Leader. Hey, Danny.
Hey, John. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks for calling in the other night. Appreciate it, and good to hear from you this morning.
And to you as well. Thank you. It's funny, the longer you listen to the show, the more thoughts I have you generate, but I'll keep it succinct. I think, a coach's greatest challenge is do you keep a group together that's been successful until it starts to click, or do you keep tweaking until you hit it? I think that's sort of the great conundrum Kerr has. Do we keep tweaking, or do you stick with the core? And I think if it wasn't for Wiggins and Clay getting off to such a bad start, 2 years ago they had, I think, the number one starting five as far as performance. Correct me if I'm wrong. But
last season, that was the number one starting five.
And so off this year, and I thought,
oh, we're losing you there. Let's get. Oh, Danny, I got you back now, but I lost you there for a second.
Sorry, I think I'm going into a good area now. I was just going to say, so 40% of the starting five is performing. So I think that was a bit of an anomaly. And I think I 100% agree Draymond should go back in. They need a defense. They need their defense.
Danny, we're losing you there. Let's go ahead and put Danny on hold or let him go, and maybe we'll have him call back a little bit later to finish the call. Appreciate it, Danny. But, yeah, I think it's time to put Draymond back in the starting lineup. But what does that look like? Does that mean Draymond's going back in, and Looney's coming out? Is it Draymond goes in and Saric is coming out? You're playing Anthony Davis and LeBron James tonight. So how does that impact things? And then where does that leave Kuminga as well, as far as his ability? Part of, I think, Kuminga's added success has been he's been playing with Draymond a lot. I think Draymond being on the floor with Kuminga makes Kuminga a more aware defensive player. And I think that prodding and coaching is sort of necessary for him to be able to function at a higher level in the team concept of what the Warriors are trying to do defensively. Michael in Mountain View next here on the Sports Leader. Hey, Michael.
How are you doing today? This
Good.
is Michael in Mountain View.
Yeah, what do you got,
I
Michael?
think the Warriors need to do two things. They need to get more defense, but the defensive players that can shoot and understand if they can keep Draymond Green about his antics, and if they don't do something about it, if the league does, they're in trouble. If they decide to keep him, do they value John Kuminga and other players less than Draymond Green because of all his antics? He might be a great player, but can they keep a good team with all his antics going on and getting in trouble?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, no, that's what it boils down to is, if you're going to keep Draymond Green, it can't be the way that it's been here over the last 2 months, plain and simple. And I think Draymond knows it. I think the Warriors know it. And it's not a matter of valuing, one player more than another. I mean, you either want players to be on your roster or you don't. And I think the Warriors at this point want Draymond Green to be on the roster because they're a better team when he is. And I think that's independent of anything that's going on with any of the younger players or anything. Like, you can want Draymond Green to be on your roster and want Jonathan Kuminga to be on your roster. And, make no mistake, Draymond Green is still a more valuable player to this Warriors team and what they're trying to do than Kuminga is. And that's no slight on Kuminga. It's just reality. Draymond is still their best defender. He's still their defensive leader and organizer, and he's still the number one player that's tied to Stephen Curry from an offensive standpoint in terms of being a facilitator. I mean, those two go hand in hand. at this point. And so he is, in many ways, still the second most important and or valuable Golden State Warrior, but the antics can't be there, and he can't be doing things that put him in position to where he's not going to be on the floor. I agree with the first part of that caller that made, which was, every team wants defensive players that can shoot. Every team wants more of those guys, and I think that's the balance. I think as much as the Warriors, Greg, had sold us and tried to sell themselves on the ability that the pieces fit together much better on this Warriors team than last year's, and maybe from a chemistry standpoint, like an off the court standpoint, or on the court chemistry as far as like guys liking each other, playing for each other. Maybe that part is true, but from a basketball standpoint, I don't think that the chemistry has. I don't want to say the chemistry's been bad, but I don't think the pieces have fit together from a basketball standpoint at the level in which the Warriors believed and or tried to sell to the media and sell to the fan base. There's still too much of, if this guy has to play, then that guy has to play, and then this group has to play, and then that means somebody else can't play. But then if you want to play that guy who's not playing, you have to play two other players in different ways, and then it takes away from the first group's ability to succeed. Like, there's still way too much. Like, you love Chris Paul's offense, but then you're playing two small guards, and he helps you late in games, but then some of that's negated because you're playing two small guards, plus Klay Thompson at the 3 a lot, finishing games. And if he's doing that, then where does it leave Wiggins? He can't thrive necessarily playing the 3, so he gets bumped to the 4. Then it becomes Kuminga versus Wiggins if it's 4 versus 4. And I think at this point, Kuminga's a better 4.
And it's
than
just
Wiggins
exhausting.
is. Exactly, Greg. It goes back to the Bob Myers. Wiggins is a better 3 than Kuminga. Kuminga is a better 4 than Wiggins, and it's so funny. Somebody had tweeted at me this during the week, the combination, which has been better with Draymond, the combination of Kuminga and Wiggins, it really is contingent on Wiggins' offense, because the Warriors need Wiggins' defense, which is still good. So the Warriors need Wiggins' defense, but you're iffy on the offense. They need Kuminga's offense, which has been good, but you're iffy on Kuminga's defense, especially from a team standpoint. And so even that becomes, as Bob Myers said, exhausting, Greg.
Well, JD, it's not even just if this guy plays, then this guy has to play, and these combinations work together, and maybe this combination isn't the right combination. It's also that 95% of players on this roster sometimes have it, and therefore it's a good lineup and a good combination. And sometimes they do not. Like, Andrew Wiggins is such a wild card. Defensively, he usually shows up and is at the very least solid. Offensively, he could be okay, he could be good, or he could be detrimental. Jonathan Kuminga, his highs are unbelievable and should give this fan base all the optimism in the world, and his lows are pretty frustrating. Brandon Pajemski, on the other hand, it's like his ceiling is much lower, and his floor also isn't that much lower either. If he's making shots, that really helps. But yes, to answer your question and to throw in our Bob Myers, it's just exhausting drop. I do think that when Steph, Klay, and Draymond are all out there together, and Klay's having one of his nights, you see things clicking and you see the chemistry. But there is far too much inconsistency individually, and the fact that there's 9 players on this team that are capable of playing pretty good basketball, but just as equally capable of not really showing up, how do you ever get into a rhythm that way from a coaching and a lineup standpoint? I mean, I know everybody loves to come at Steve Kerr's head, and I'm not saying Steve Kerr's had his best year from a coaching standpoint, but he's not in the easiest position either. Go ahead.
No, I think you look at the Looney, Saric, Wiggins starting front line, right? I think for the most part that was working for a couple of games. I think Steve Kerr did it in part because he wanted to bring Draymond off the bench to help manage his minutes better. In part, I think they wanted to empower they wanted to be able to start Wiggins at the 3, but also empower Kuminga to come in as the backup 4, playing with Draymond, and empower Kuminga, especially if Saric is going to be in the starting lineup as a shooter, empower Kuminga to come off the bench as a backup 4 and just look to score. Just look to get after it, especially without Chris Paul facilitating with that second group. Like, look to just go and get after it. But and I think it was working. Now, defensively, collectively, it hasn't worked, that group, because they've been bad defensively in these last stretch of games before and after the hiatus. But the problem has been the first time that this team struggles, everybody starts screaming about, why the hell are you starting Saric and Looney? Why the hell are you start? So it's like immediately it becomes the blame. And so Steve Kerr is caught now between, do you stick with it because you like the bigger picture concept of what it provides, better for, because I think you could make the case, Greg, in a vacuum, that the way Steve Kerr has played it individually has been better for Draymond as he comes back, better for Kuminga to allow him to spread his wings a little bit, better for Wiggins, who starts at the 3, better for Saric, who provides shooting among Wiggins and Looney, who don't provide shooting, at least Wiggins doesn't consistently. And you've got a little bit of a bigger lineup out there with Looney, Saric, and Wiggins on the front line to start the game. So you could make a case that lineup grouping has actually helped 4 or 5 different players thrive, but then the first time they get cooked in a first quarter and Looney and Saric struggle, you've got, the internet and the fan base screaming to get, Draymond at a minimum back into the starting lineup, but Draymond and Kuminga, because Kuminga lately has been their second or third best player.
Right. And Bob, I'll just defer to you one more time.
And it's just exhausting.
It's tough. So do you stick with it, or are you making another change to where you're making a change reacting to who's playing well, right? Because if Steve Kerr put Draymond and Kuminga back in the starting lineup tonight, both of them would deserve it, right? And you could make a case from a basketball standpoint. It's like, hey, play your best players the most minutes. Kuminga's one of their best players right now. Draymond always one of their best players. Wiggins. At this point, I think it's going to be out there. He's played better. And then Steph and Clay are going to be out there. But you make that move to make that change, and then it springs another problem, right? Like maybe those guys get theirs, but now the bench isn't quite as productive, or now your bench group isn't as good, is worse defensively, or lacks Kuminga's punch in the same minutes that he was providing it when he was coming off the bench. So you basically are fixing one thing, but you're creating another hole in another area, and you wind up basically being a different version of the same, Greg, which I think is why this team can't get off the schneid and can't get not only back to 500, but separate themselves back to above 500 and look like a team that's at least contending for a play-in tournament spot.
Well, I'm really glad we have another Dubs OT today, because all of this talk has just been a bunch of flip-flopping, and it's completely justified. It's not anything that you're doing wrong or I'm doing wrong or the listeners are doing wrong. It's just been, we're going off the information of what the Warriors have given us.
Well, that's how the Warriors have done.
Exactly.
Right? They've done it all year with this team. And look, I think Steve Kerr stuck with the traditional lineup, the Steph, Clay, Wiggins, Draymond, Looney lineup. He basically stuck with it for 20 games, in and around Draymond being in and out of the lineup. So I think he stuck with it. I think if you caught Steve Kerr in a quiet moment and gave him the truth serum, I think there's a part of him that wants to go back to that lineup and basically just ride or die with that lineup. And then you go to adding Kuminga back, adding Kuminga basically as the backup. Maybe Kuminga comes in for Looney. Right? Maybe Kuminga comes in for Looney in the first 4 minutes, and then it's Dre with Kuminga and Wiggins, Steph and Clay, which has been an effective lineup, and you play that group for 4 or 5 minutes, and then you go to make your next subs with, some Pajemski for Clay for Wiggins, and then you play that group for a little bit. You got to play Corey Joseph, I think, a couple of minutes right now. So I think there's ways to manipulate it, but I don't know. There's a pull between, like, if Draymond's coming back tonight, it feels to me, well, you can make the case, Greg, that Kuminga deserves to start. If Draymond comes back, I feel like Draymond coming back is probably the only move, and it's Draymond and Looney because of, again, now who you're going. The next 2 games, are you really going to take Looney out of the lineup when you're going up against Anthony Davis, when you're going up against Joel Embiid? Like that. So the timing of making a switch, I think, is also in play here because you're trying to win these games.
Yep. Anthony Davis is also traditionally feasted on this Warriors interior, so we're going to have a lot more coming for you very, very soon.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun and really looking forward to it as that's going to do it for us. 2 hours just flying by. Greg, appreciate your help, my man. Raph in our San Francisco studios as well, helping to screen the calls and help out with the sound. I'm John Dickinson. Back tonight, following the Warriors and the Lakers right here on the Sports Leader. Harmonic Brewing, Dubs OT from Harmonic Brewing. Join me for that after the Dubs and the Lakers as they go at it in a nationally televised game on ABC. So we'll talk to you tonight. It's KNBR 104.5 and 680, the Sports Leader.